So-Yun. You can call me So or So-Yun. I am 35 years old and I am born and raised in Los Angeles. Growing up in Koreatown in the 90s was really interesting because it was like the Wild Wild West. We really had the rise of K-pop here, especially with 90s fashion and the rise of HOT. I felt like it was just an exciting time. Back then, you could take a Korean taxi for $3 anywhere, and they would just take you. And we were just a bunch of kids going to like house parties to house parties to house parties. And obviously, our parents were working the entire time. The city is very different now because it's getting gentrified. It has been getting gentrified for the past 10 to 15 years, so it has changed so much. I think to me, back then, it was so much freedom and exploration. And I think we were always so proud to be Korean because we were surrounded by our culture at all times. I think I was always pretty conscious of our social class and our economic class just because I also had friends from various backgrounds and I was thinking, wow, like they are doing way better than us. And of course, as a child, you don't recognize if you're rich or not until you're confronted with certain things. And I think because my parents couldn't afford a lot of things, that was like the moment where I realized, oh, are we poor or can we not afford things like this other family can? And so I think I was always hyper aware. And so I always felt like this chip on my shoulder. They were pretty open to me going to work with them, selling socks at the swap meets. And so we would get up really early. And I'm glad that I experienced it. But also I felt like, why do I have to experience this? Why do I have to come to work with you all the time? When my dad finally went into the liquor store business when I was 10, of course, the entire family had to work there because he was completely pivoting into a new career from being a house painter to being a liquor store owner. And so it was kind of like all hands on deck. And me and my sister worked there for several years, which it is not the best place to be working in a liquor store. My teen years were already filled with so much angst, but now I'm in a kind of a volatile place where I see my parents being verbally attacked, physically attacked. Things are happening constantly, and it's not a happy place to be. And so I think that was the moment where I realized I don't really want to come to work with you. I'd rather just stay home and just be a teen. I picked a career or a major because I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do, but I just knew that I'm going to pick something that I know I'll have interest for in a while. I don't know if I can make money in it, but I just want to be interested in it for the long haul. And that's kind of how I ended up picking film. And of course, my parents always wanted me to pick something more reasonable. I don't think we are an academic family, so for us, it was something that, I don't know, any other career felt like out of the question. I know I couldn't be a lawyer, I couldn't be a doctor. Like, I think that was very unrealistic for people in our family just because we, like I said, we have a very entrepreneurial spirit. So if anything, we would have probably went into business. Sure, they probably would have wanted me to have something more secure, but I think they said, do it and see what you can do. No pressure, no nothing. And of course, in like 5 years, if you can't make it, then you have to go back to school. Considering there was no jobs post-2008 economic crisis, I graduated in 2011, and my only goal was to watch free movies. So that's what I ended up doing. I interned at a bunch of film companies, and within a few years, I was able to accomplish my goal. And also, I launched my YouTube channel called So's Real Thoughts, where I reviewed movies. I was watching so many movies and reviewing movies. At this point, it's been 10 plus years. I made over 300 videos where I just talk about movies. They're all shot pretty poorly, but they ended up doing pretty well with a certain demographic because I wanted to highlight very indie, international, and very like genre films. And I looked at a lot of these established filmmakers like Park Chan-wook, who was a film critic before he became a filmmaker. So I was like, why can't I just try it all? I think for me, I didn't want to pigeonhole myself, but also I fell into this jack of all trades, master of none kind of syndrome, I guess, where I did everything, but I wasn't focused. So I was reviewing movies online. I was film programming at film festivals, at LA Asian, AFI Fest, just anywhere that I could watch films and also judge them and get to talk to filmmakers. So I spent a lot of my 20s watching films. So sure, I made a lot of short films here and there, but I wasn't improving. I wasn't getting better just because I think I was in this impulse and I guess erratic like mentality where I just wanted to make as many things as possible. But I think so much of filmmaking is you're making it for an audience. And it wasn't until my late 20s where I finally got a fellowship after applying 3 times where they required me to make a 5-minute short film. And that was the moment where I was like, well, I always wanted to tell a story about me and my dad. My dad owning a liquor store, I think there's something kind of special here. Why don't I just try to make something? It wasn't until that moment where I actually collaborated with another editor, her name is Jean Ream, she's brilliant, that I made something really good for the very first time after making 100 shitty shorts. And I think it's because I didn't want to improve. And I was very stubborn about this. I think for me, it was like persevering through all the rejections and almost collecting the rejections. As many rejections you can collect, then you can only grow and get better. And that was kind of the motto that I carried. So after 3 times, I finally got in. And to me, I always felt like it was the right place, right timing. This was the right project. So when I decided to do a feature, I couldn't see a clear path for me. I didn't understand how somebody went from a short film to a feature length. And sure, I talked to a lot of industry people, but I really couldn't understand it from like my immigrant brain, just because we didn't come from money. And I also think that filmmaking is a career where you kind of need to be a Nepo baby. You need to have a backup plan because it takes so much money and time and resources that a regular person just does not have and have access to. And so I think for me, given my background, given my lack of experience too, how can I make this film the most realistic that I can? So I was like, you know what? Let's crowdfund. Let's crowdfund $30,000. And I did it by myself, knowing how important the story was. I also understood how many liquor store babies were out there in our generation. And so I think that for me, I always wanted to tell a story for us, by us, and that I always wanted to tell a different perspective contrary to what the media has shown us of what Korean people are supposed to be. I think in Hollywood, you can only tell like 1 or 2 stories here and there. Whereas documentary, you have so much more freedom to tell very specific, nuanced stories. And so I've had the privilege of being able to do just that, tell my story. And so I never faced a moment where I was forced to work with somebody I didn't like or had to report to a white superior or anything else. I think so much of it was trying to figure out, okay, what kind of filmmaker do I want to be? And I said, well, I only really want to work with people of color. I want to prioritize women. I want to showcase our stories as authentically as possible. And I think within documentary, I was able to do that. The only goal with Liquor Store Dreams was that I want to make a film that Korean people are proud of, both globally and within the US, something that everybody can resonate with, which I can't normally say with Korean American films made in the US, just because culturally it may not transcend or be understood. But I think for me it was really important that the diaspora will be able to understand it. So while I'm making a film for Korean people, I also have to think about generationally, our young people and older generation people, will they both be able to understand the message? And luckily they were able to, because the whole point of the film is trying to bridge generational divides. And so for me, my core audience is my parents, and the core audience for younger people is me. And so as long as these 2 demographics were able to understand what I'm trying to say, I did my job. And I think the biggest test was I made a very American movie about a Korean American family living specifically in LA. Will people in Korea be able to understand the story I'm telling? So much of this narrative that I had in my head was that actual Korean people living in Korea do not care about Korean American stories. That was kind of what I told myself, just because I saw it time and time again. So it was probably the biggest shock when our film got invited to the Busan International Film Festival. It was a validation that I didn't think I needed, that I actually needed. And so we had 3 screenings there that completely sold out. And to me, I'm like, how did you even hear about our film? Korean people who don't have any relation to me that came to the screening. And I think when I heard their thoughts and their feelings about how they received the film, it was so enlightening and so heartwarming, just because I wanted us to all be on the same page despite us not being born in the same place. That I think that the cultural struggle and history, that we all understood that. My parents were not unsupportive, but they weren't like advocating for me every step of the way. So I think they were pretty like lukewarm in my career choices. I always think, would they be this proud if it wasn't successful? And I don't know, because it was successful. And my dad went to Korea with me twice for Busan International as well as the Diaspora Film Festival. So he really got to see kind of the scope of the reach the film had. So we did full-on Q&As, and the audience is very different there. And so they're so thoughtful and they're so welcoming, and they asked a lot of interesting questions about the diaspora. And I think the one thing that always kept coming up was the Chuseok scene. There's a Chuseok scene in my film, and they were like, well, why is that important to you? Because in Korea, we barely celebrate Chuseok anymore. And for me, I was like, wow, well, I think so much of Korean American identity is trying to hold on to anything, any semblance of your motherland culturally. And so we want to pay tribute to something that, sure, we don't practice it all the time, but we want to feel connected to it and kind of honor it. And so that was a surprising question that I got, that why would I showcase something so embedded into Korean culture in my film? I thought they would understand, but I also know that Korea is light years ahead of us in different ways, and that the things that Korean Americans hold on to, they don't necessarily understand why we do. I hope people continue to tell their specific Korean American story. To me, I felt like I needed to tell mine because I grew up in a very generic way that I would be able to represent all Korean Americans. But of course, that's not really the case. And I think that if you do not see your experience represented, it is your duty to tell your story in the way that you can. My name is So-Yeon, and this is my Korean American story.